All right. So I'm having to redo this video. The earlier one that I did, wanted to show you guys some footage from Moana. So then when I went to upload it to YouTube, of course I can't upload it to YouTube. I had a recording of Moana on it. Anyway, so I'll have to forego that one and I'll just tell you about it. So let's go ahead and share here. And we're going to be talking about Kingdom Protista from here, slideshow from beginning. And so again, I think that I mentioned the four kingdoms, right? We've got Kingdom Plantain, Amelia, Fungi, and Protista. We're going to start with Protista here. What's kind of cool about the Protistans, and sort of frustrating too, is that they're a dumping ground for everything that's not a plant, an animal, or a fungus. They don't really have a set of characteristics that defines what they are. They're just sort of a hodgepodge of all kinds of different organisms that do a lot of different stuff. And so it's extremely diverse. And so really we've divided it essentially into two areas, the protozoa and the algae. And before I get into that, though, I'd like to, talk a little bit about the motility here. Most of your protistans are actually motile. Even the algae have some ability to move using a flagella, cilia, or pseudopodia. Your flagella, of course, is going to create that wave. The amoebas here, they move using a pseudopod, which it means false foot. And so they're going to kind of extend their cell membrane, anchor it down, and then sort of pull the rest of the cell over. Very slow, pretty inefficient, but they can move anyway. And then, of course, we have the cilia. Cilia are going to be tiny little hairs that are made of pretty much the same thing as a flagella, but rather than whipping in a wave, they're going to be sweeping back, right? And so the cilia, the protistans that have cilia on them move quite quickly. And so because of the huge amount of diversity in the Kingdom Protista, there's a lot of debate as to how to classify them. There's not really a whole lot of agreement on what ways we should, but in a fairly introductory course like this one, we would go with pretty much the most simple way of classifying, which is going to be the protozoans and the algae, and in some cases we'll add the fungus-like protists as well. I'm going to begin here by talking about all the different types of algae. Because algae are really important. They account for a significant amount of oxygen in our atmosphere. They are the precursors to plants, and they provide significant habitat and food, and really they've got quite a huge ecological impact. And there's a lot of them. There's a whole lot of them. We divide them into these groups. You've got the brown algae, the red algae, the green algae, the fire algae, the gold algae, and in some cases, we dump the euglenids in as well. So I'm just going to hit a couple of my favorite algae from each group. The first one here, we've got our brown algae. Brown algae are usually quite large. They form these big forests of seaweed, like the kelp forests, which are extremely ecologically important. They perform a similar function in the colder northern waters of the ocean as a coral reef does in the tropical waters. And they're a true multicellular organism. So when you see these, you're not looking at a plant. When the kelp kind of washes up on the beach in California, that's not a plant. It is actually a protistan. It's an algae. And we've got a couple of different major groups, the laminariales and the fucales, and both of these are going to have a similar structure to create these habitats, these kelp forests. You got a holdfast which are sort of like roots that hold the algae down. You have a stipe, which is kind of like a stem that everything grows off of. You have a blade or lamina, which is sort of like a leaf. It's collecting a lot of the sun's energy. And then you're going to have these funny little structures called pneumatocysts, which are the air bladders that you see on the kelp. So when the kelp washes up on the beach in California, and there's all those little ball structures on the kelp, when you cut into those, and then all of us have done this, we've all broken them open, and it's just hollow on the inside. That's because it's a float. It's there to hold the whole structure as close to the surface as they can in order to gather sunlight energy. And those are called pneumatocysts. Then we get into the red algae. So what you're looking at right here is not a coral, even though it looks a lot like a coral and it performs a lot of similar functions ecologically as a coral does. It is actually what we call a coralline red algae. And they produce that calcium carbonate skeleton just like a coral does. And of course, they're going to be providing similar habitat as the coral do as well, just in a little bit cooler waters. So that's your coralline red algae, but then there's a lot of red algae that we use extensively as humans: agar, carrageenan, and nori. These are all food products. Carrageenan is used in dairy products to keep it, milks creamy and smooth. So, when you drink your chocolate milk that you get from the store, not quick, but the actual like bottle of chocolate milk, they put a lot of carrageenan in that to keep it smooth and creamy. Agar is used in a lot of sort of fancy foods. You can make boba out of them. You can make those water drop cakes that you see on Instagram. That's agar. And then nori is the wrap for seaweed. Anyway, then we get to the green algae. Green algae are the most recognizable. Most of us have seen green algae. I've got a couple of examples here. This slimy stuff down here is called Spirogyra, and it grows everywhere. It's all over. If you have a little bit of a warm body of water that's not moving around much, you're going to get Spirogyra growing on it. It's the green scum, and you can see all the little bubbles that are popping up. Well, they're not popping, they're just kind of sitting there. It's gross, right? The gross water that you see in a cattle tank or in a stagnant pond, it's going to be full of Spirogyra. And if I were to take a handful of that, it'd be really, really slimy. Up here, we have what's called the water net, or hydrodictyon. Hydrodictyon forms these lattice structures, and it's actually very common in a lot of our ponds. The biggest colony of hydrodictyon that I've seen was in the ponds at Green Valley Park in Payson. So if you guys go up to where the benches are, you've got the horny toad and the javelina benches right there, and then there's that little trickle of water that goes down into the pond. I found a lot of hydrodictyon in that particular spot. Anyway, and then a lot of us who float the Gila down here in the Gila Valley will often see these really big colonies of really kind of long, stringy, very hairy seaweed, pondweed, whatever you want to call it. It's an algae, and it kind of feels and looks coarse, like wet cat hair is usually how we describe it. That's Cladophora. Anyway, green algae has a lot of potential as livestock food and human food even as well. And then, of course, there's some potential for creating bio oils from our green algae as well. Fire algae are really cool. The Pyrophyta dinoflagellates are going to be the main members of this group. They're single-celled, and they form, if there's a bloom of nutrients, then they will cause a red tide. And a red tide, I mean, it looks like that. It turns the seawater red, and it's going to cause major fish die-offs. The shellfish that wind up with these dinoflagellates in their bodies, they wind up poisonous. So So oftentimes, you'll go to a restaurant and you'll say, can I get some oysters or clams? And they'll say, no, we don't have any of those right now. There's a red tide off the coast of California or Texas or wherever. But what's really cool is that they're also bioluminescent. And so the scene, and this is what I recorded mistakenly. I've since deleted that video. Totally violated copyright laws. But what I would have shown you, and what I do show you in my classes, that scene when Moana's grandma dies and her spirit kind of comes through and enters the ocean as a stingray, and you see all of the like bluish green lights in the ocean, and it's really kind of moving and a big deal. Well, that's real, actually. That happens during a red tide. The dinoflagellates, when they're disturbed, when you kind of splash in the water during a red tide at night, they bioluminesce, and they bioluminesce exactly that same color. So if you want to watch it, get on YouTube and look up Moana, How Far I'll Go reprise, and you'll see that scene where you see the bioluminescence in the ocean, and it's real. It's really quite cool. We get to the gold algae here. These are diatoms. Diatoms are quite interesting in that they will take in silica from their surrounding environment and then secrete it out into a little cocoon. And you guys might know that silica is kind of what we use to make glass. So these guys have these little glass cocoons that they live in. They're really pretty. They're always lots of fun to find when you're looking at pond water. And they account for a huge amount of the oxygen that we breathe. 20 to 50% is what we think. And then in addition, diatomaceous earth are the fossil remnants of those little glass cocoons that we can use as a pesticide or as an abrasive. As a pesticide, if you get it into the joints of your bugs, it's like tiny little shards of glass. So imagine, pouring tiny little shards of glass and getting into the joints of the bug. It just kind of shreds them and they bleed out. The euglenids are quite interesting, real different. Some scientists actually don't like putting them in with the algae because they are actually heterotrophic. They will swim around looking for food to eat, but some scientists leave them in the algae because they're also photosynthetic. And that's what makes them really weird, is that they sort of walk this line of being both photosynthetic and heterotrophic. They're very common. Some of them are parasitic, and oftentimes, well, a lot of the euglenids are closely related to other parasitic protozoans. So, but those are pretty much the algae right there. Fascinating group of organisms. We do think that the algae are the precursors to plants. We think the plants are fairly directly related to a couple of different algae, the chlorophyta and the charophyta algae families. But kind of in and of themselves, they're fascinating. A lot of them move. A lot of them, they perform a huge part in the ecosystems of any aquatic area, and they're kind of a lot of fun to watch. If you ever have a chance to look at pond water under a microscope, you really should. So that's it. That's all I've got for you. I'll see you on the next one.